Hey babes, welcome back to my channel. As you can see from the title of today's video, it is a very special edition for Mother's Day. So to start off, for all of you out there, happy Mother's Day if you are a mother. And for those of you joining me from the Hispanic world, Feliz Dia de las Madres a ustedes. As you see from the video title, as I mentioned, I will be walking you guys through what was my journey into motherhood, not only the first time, but then also the second time. Bless you, mama. So I don't have a lot of details I can go over from Thiago's birth because it's been nearly 4 years now since that happened. But I'm going to talk through both of them and what I recall, bless you, mama, of both births. Bless you, mamas. So to take you guys back with me, in November of 2015, I found out that I was pregnant with my precious baby boy, Thiago. At the time, I had no idea what awaited me in terms of pregnancy or childbirth. All I know is that I was excited, I was terrified, and I was looking forward to everything that came with this journey of motherhood. We had an estimated due date of August 2nd with Thiago. My pregnancy with him was, for the most part, pretty smooth. I had some nausea during the very beginning of my pregnancy, and really my only food aversion with him was green chili. So things were pretty smooth up through the end. At the end, of course, being that it was in the summer, it got very hot, it got very sticky, and it got very uncomfortable, but overall still pretty tolerable. On July 28th at night, I had some leaking of fluid, which I then thought to be potentially amniotic fluid leakage. So that night, even though I had dinner plans with my friend, shout out to Emily, we ended up rerouting from dinner to the hospital just to make sure that I wasn't actually leaking fluid and make sure everything was okay. So the night of 28th, I went into the doctor, we got checked in. I was not leaking amniotic fluid, but they did end up giving me an IV because I was slightly dehydrated. But on top of that, they ended up keeping me in observation overnight because Thiago's heartbeat was rather irregular. So the 29th, at about noon, they discharged me. We went home because we had a long night of being checked and rechecked over and over again. And spent the day basically in just kind of relaxing. The 29th into the 30th at about 1:30 to 2 in the morning, I woke up to use the restroom, lost my mucus plug, and then went back to bed trying to go back to sleep. Couldn't because I was having what I felt were like back cramps, like very like intense back cramps like during your period. Because I couldn't go back to sleep, I got up because I figured I'm going to keep my husband up if I don't just get up and go do something. And I went into our living room to bounce on our exercise ball. I did that for about 30 minutes or so. Little did I know that when I got up to try to go back to bed, my water broke. So I then, of course, woke my husband up, went to the bathroom, made sure I hadn't peed myself because that is a thing. And what do you know, they said, go ahead and come on in, we'll check you when you're here. Instead of rushing to the hospital, I took a quick shower. My husband woke up. We both had a quick bite to eat at home because nothing's open, of course, at 2 in the morning. And then we headed off into the hospital. Contractions started basically right away, and right away they were pretty intense. We get to the hospital. Sure enough, they confirmed my water had broken. So we get admitted and things are happening, you know, as they do. Making things rather complicated is that because we'd been at the hospital and we'd had regular heartbeats being detected previously already, they didn't want to not monitor me. So they had me on the baby monitor, and they refused basically to not have that be able to detect the baby's heart rate, the baby's heartbeat. And the reason I mention that is because I found comfort in the bathtub with hot water running down my back. But because they couldn't detect the baby's heartbeat while I was in the tub, they had to get out. Once they told me that they weren't able to detect the baby's heart rate and that I wasn't able to be in the water anymore, I went ahead and I opted for an epidural because things were so uncomfortable. And I had been having trouble actually getting him to drop, so we'd had some difficulties with it right off the bat. Things felt better after that, but shortly after we realized that the reason things were so uncomfortable is because one, baby was sunny side up, and two, I was having back labor because of how the baby was placed and how he was coming out. So unfortunately, that just made things a lot more difficult for me. But essentially what ended up happening was once it came time to push, we did that for a couple of hours and it became really difficult again because he was sunny side up. On top of that, there was a cervical ring around the baby's head that didn't allow him to drop the way he was supposed to. And then after that happened, basically, we got to a point where his head wasn't dropping. So essentially what they told me once I'd been pushing for a couple hours is you can continue to push. We don't know how long it'll be before he's out. Or we can use the forceps and just pull him out. At this point, I'm exhausted, so I said, let's go for the forceps. Once that happened, we went ahead and, of course, next push out, pulled him out using the forceps, which caused third-degree tearing for me. But even worse so, what happened was we found that, I'm assuming what was because of the distress of everything that had been going on and the trauma of the situation, he was not breathing. Call in for all of the nurses and the doctors from the nursery, as they called it, to come in and help. And then, of course, me being taken care of all at once. So there was a lot going on. Essentially, though, what ended up happening, thankfully, is that he started coming to. And once that happened, they were able to make sure that his vitals were starting to normalize. Once they did, though, they did take him back for observation. So unfortunately, we weren't able to do the things that I was looking forward to, which were like skin to skin, for example, and immediate breastfeeding. Once they did bring him back, though, they did mention that they were just going to monitor his oxygen, monitor breathing, and just make sure that he was going to be okay. There was a lot that happened with that, made it rather traumatic. Made my husband and I really questioned whether we actually wanted to have more kids, only because it was just a really intense, dramatic kind of situation. Fast forward, not quite 3 years later, we find out, of course, we are pregnant with our second. I should mention that they were both planned, so we were very happy that this, of course, happened the way that we were planning for it to happen. So June of 2019, I found out I was pregnant. In July, I had my first appointment, and so of course that first appointment is really important. You have that initial ultrasound, they give you the date of an anticipated due date, and so it's just a very exciting appointment. During that appointment, we did find that number one, we actually were expecting twins, and one of the twins just did not develop. At least that's what I was told right off the bat, is that was the conclusion. And so we were told to come back 2 weeks later just to make sure and confirm that there was actual no growth in the at that point in the egg. When we went back 2 weeks later, of course, they confirmed that the fetus did not develop, and there was only one egg there at that point. As you guys saw from the video that I previously posted, we did find out we were having a baby girl through a gender reveal, so we were very excited to have our baby. Looks like we're tired of the swing. So throughout the pregnancy, outside of that, there were a couple other things that did come up that were not something that came up in my first pregnancy. First thing was something that initially the doctor saw was just round ligament pain. And it was essentially just this pinching punch kind of a feeling that I was getting in my groin. Essentially, anytime that I would get up from my chair, get in my car, if I was on my feet too long, if I was laying in bed and I tried to lift a leg to move it over or move it around, that would cause this really uncomfortable, sometimes very painful feeling in my groin. Anyone out there who has had kids and who has had something similar to this, they immediately default to, oh, it's round ligament pain, which was initially what I felt, but I noticed that it didn't seem right. So I went to my doctor's appointment, and they said, well, it's something normal, buy a support belt of some sort, and that should help. I bought a normal support belt. I bought a belt that's intended to tighten the waist to kind of help with the pressure and the weight of a baby, because essentially that's what you're feeling, is discomfort of a baby and their weight pulling on these muscles, and of course it's impacting your groin because that's where these muscles all connect to. None of it helped. I was seeing a chiropractor, and that wasn't necessarily helping either. And I went to a physical therapist because at one point they believed that it was also pelvic floor weakness that might be causing that. And while the pelvic floor therapy sessions, therapy movements that they were having me do, the exercises, helped a particular area that was causing discomfort, it didn't help everything. So at the end of the day, I ended up going through my entire pregnancy, starting at about 15 to 20 weeks, something around that area, around that time, feeling this discomfort in my groin, which was awful to say the least. After that, I also had situations where they thought that it might be kidney stones. And so, of course, I was being seen for these things regularly. It was very uncomfortable. And unfortunately, it just made the experience least than exciting. During my initial trimester, I had a lot of nausea. I had an aversion to coffee, which anyone who knows me knows coffee is just my thing. And I had a lot of cravings. Some of my cravings were essentially just sweets, but I had a lot of savory cravings as well, which is not something that I normally crave. Anyway, a lot of roller coaster ride type of emotions happened during this second pregnancy. Towards the end, I started getting a lot of Braxton Hicks. You know, me being a person who didn't get Braxton Hicks in the initial pregnancy, I initially thought it was just her causing movements that was making my stomach feel really tight. Afterwards, I realized what they were. Things kept getting really intense. There was 1 week in particular where things got really bad. They started getting pretty consistent, and I went in, and of course, they admitted me for observation. I had contractions, but they were pretty scattered and not consistent, so I got sent home, which is fine. You know, that's obviously something that happens, but then of course things like that just make you a little nervous about going back in. For about a week and a half after that, I continued to feel contractions, Braxton Hicks contractions. I'll be quiet. I continued to feel Braxton Hicks contractions. I continued to feel that pinching, pounding pain in my groin. Of course, there's the natural backaches. And because I have all of these things going on at once, plus the additional normal symptom of having to use the restroom all the time, things just got really difficult. So at my 39-week appointment with my doctor, I had explained all these things to her, and she asked me, at 38 weeks, she stripped my membranes. At 39 weeks, she asked me if she wanted to have me, at 39 weeks, she asked me if I wanted her to strip my membranes again, which she did. However, at that point, because she was starting to come down pretty low, she could feel the head. She was scared of doing an entire stripping, only because she was afraid she'd break my water right then and there. Because of the discomforts and the concerns at that point that I had been mentioning to her, she did ask me if a induction was something that I would be interested in. And of course, at that point, I was all over it. You know, considering just how uncomfortable I was, how painful some of these things were, I asked her, if this is a possibility, can we schedule an induction? Is that something that would be possible to do? And we did. So on February 13th, we went in for a scheduled induction at 9 a.m. Bubby, can you go give me baby sister's bottle from the table in the kitchen? I checked in at 9 a.m. By 10 a.m. I was given Pitocin through an IV, which was then upped in dosage every hour. Thank you, baby. That's great. Thank you. A few hours later, at about 1 p.m. Thank you, baby.
What's that?
It's a box.
Yeah.
At about 1 p.m., they came in and they decided that they wanted to approach the Pitocin a bit more aggressively. After the Pitocin was then upped in dosage again, at about 1 p.m., they came in and they broke my water in an attempt to get things moving. Once that had happened, a couple hours later, which they mentioned to me that they would after they had broke my water. So once that happened, things started to get a bit uncomfortable. I had told myself, because I held out so long with Thiago's labor for an epidural, that this time around I wouldn't do it, just to not make my life any harder, because you do have to stay still, obviously, as they are giving you the epidural in your spine. So they came in and they did that. Shortly after that, maybe about 3, Once that happened, I felt a little better for a little while. However, I started noticing that unlike when I received an epidural for Thiago, with Everly, I could still move my feet, I could still wiggle my toes. Over time, the contractions started feeling pretty intense again, which of course, anybody who knows that if you get an epidural, that's the whole point of an epidural, is you're not supposed to feel any of it. But I was. And so I went ahead and I dealt with it. I hit the little button that they give you just to give you that extra little just bump to make you feel a little better. Did that a couple of times and just was not helping. So I went ahead and I did my nurse call button and I told them, hey, I'm getting pretty uncomfortable again. Could we get the anesthesiologist to take a look at this? So he came in and gave me an extra boost. About 15 minutes later, I started feeling better. But again, like I said, I could still feel my toes. I could still wiggle my toes. It got to a point where, again, the contractions was just, they were getting pretty intense. It got to the point where I didn't want the anesthesiologist coming in again. I was just gonna kind of try to breathe through it, which is exactly what I did. At one point, my oxygen level started getting kind of low, so I was put on an oxygen mask, so that started to happen. Baby was a champ through all of this. So after all of this is happening, at about 9 p.m. they come in and they say that they're scaling back the Pitocin that they're putting through my IV. The reason being that the doctor had 2 C-sections that ended up getting scheduled back to back, and they wanted to make sure that she was available at the time that I was ready to deliver. And I was getting pretty close at this point. I think I was maybe at a 7. So sure enough, they scaled that back. I'm kind of just hanging out, dealing with the contractions, doing what I need to do, breathing through it. Once the doctor was actually done with the C-sections, which was at about 11:30 or so, she came in. She did a quick check, and then sure enough, I was ready for pushing. And so at 12:10 on Valentine's Day, baby Everly was born. And she couldn't have been more perfect. There was less trauma, so even that was perfection for me. We were able to do skin to skin, and initial breastfeeding, and then of course we were able to just keep her with us without having to have her wheeled off into another room for observation. As things progressed, things just were perfect. We were discharged, and the healing was just a completely different experience where things just were not as, again, traumatic to my body. So that was perfection to me as well. I don't know that I have anything else to add. I'm happy that they're in my life, and I'm happy that they've made me the woman and the mother that I am today, because they're truly just the best thing in my life. They're my biggest blessing. With that said, I think that's the perfect way for me to end this video. I just want to again say Happy Mother's Day to all you beautiful mamas out there. I hope that you're all spoiled and that you're all given all of the love and snuggles, kisses and cuddles that you all deserve out there. And I hope that this day truly is as special to you as it is to me. Don't forget to hit like on the way out, and I will see you guys on the next one, because like you, I am going to go enjoy my family and go and give all the love and the hugs and kisses and cuddles to the beautiful mamas in my life. We deserve this all. Bye.